The gunshot echoed across the Wyoming plains as Wyatt Hawkins pulled the trigger, ending the suffering of his beloved mare who'd broken her leg in a snake-spooked dash through a prairie dog town. As the April wind of 1876 whipped around him, he removed his hat, clutching it to his chest while silently saying goodbye to the finest horse he'd ever owned. Wyatt buried his face in his calloused hands, allowing himself a brief moment of grief before the approaching storm forced him back to his modest ranch. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to the solitary life he'd carved out for himself in the Wyoming Territory. After serving in the Union Army during the war, he'd wandered west with nothing but determination and dreams, eventually staking his claim on a patch of land 15 miles outside of Cheyenne. Rain began to pelt his broad shoulders as he trudged back toward his cabin, a simple two-room structure he'd built with his own hands. The nearby stable, more solidly constructed than his own living quarters, housed his 3 remaining horses. They'd need extra attention tonight with the storm rolling in. Lightning cracked across the sky as Wyatt entered the stable, the familiar scent of hay and horses usually bringing him comfort. Tonight, however, it only reminded him of his loss. He lit a lantern, casting long shadows across the wooden beams, and began his evening routine of checking on the animals. A soft whimper from the back corner stopped him cold. "Who's there?" he called out, reaching instinctively for the Colt revolver at his hip. No response came, but he heard movement in the shadows beyond the stalls. Wyatt raised his lantern higher, its glow finally revealing what, or rather who, was hiding in his stable. A woman, her dress torn and mudded, was huddled in the corner. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and her trembling hands protectively cradled her swollen belly. Even in her disheveled state, Wyatt could see she was beautiful, with dark hair tumbling around her shoulders and eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering on the roof. "Please don't hurt us." Wyatt immediately lowered his gun and took a cautious step forward. "I won't harm you, madam. Are you all right?" The woman's eyes darted toward the stable door as if contemplating escape. Wyatt noticed bruises on her wrists and a cut on her cheek. "I'm Wyatt Hawkins. This is my ranch," he said gently, keeping his distance. "You're safe here, Penelope," she replied after a long pause. "Penelope Jackson." "You're with child," Wyatt stated the obvious, unsure what else to say. "How far along?" 8 months, I reckon." Her hand moved protectively over her belly again. "I didn't know where else to go." The storm outside intensified, rain now pouring through the gaps in the stable roof. Wyatt made a quick decision. "Mrs. Jackson, you can't stay out here. My cabin isn't much, but it's dry and warm. Will you come with me?" She hesitated, studying his face as if searching for signs of deception. Finally, she nodded, attempting to stand but wincing in pain. Without asking permission, Wyatt moved forward and carefully helped her to her feet. She was soaked through, her dress clinging to her pregnant form. He removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I think so," she said, but her legs buckled with the first step. Wyatt caught her before she fell and in one fluid motion lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light despite her condition. "I've got you," he murmured as he carried her through the rain toward his cabin. Inside, he set her down gently on his only chair before stoking the dying embers in the fireplace back to life. The small cabin was simple but tidy, with a bed in one corner, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a small cooking area. "You need dry clothes," Wyatt said, retrieving a clean shirt and a pair of pants from his trunk. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside while you change." "Thank you," Penelope whispered, accepting the clothes with trembling hands. Wyatt waited on the porch, listening to the rain and wondering what circumstances had brought a pregnant woman to his stable. When she called for him to return, he found her drowning in his clothes, her wet dress hanging by the fire. "Are you hungry?" he asked, already knowing the answer from her gaunt face. She nodded eagerly, and Wyatt set about preparing a simple meal of beans, salted pork, and the last of his cornbread. He watched as she devoured the food, clearly having gone without for some time. "How long have you been running?" he asked when she finally slowed down. Penelope tensed, lowering her spoon. How did you know I was running? The bruises, the fear in your eyes, the fact that you're hiding in a stranger's stable. Wyatt sat across from her. I'm not here to judge, Mrs. Jackson. But I can't help if I don't know what I'm helping with. Tears welled in her eyes. It's Miss Jackson, actually. I never married. Understanding dawned on Wyatt's face, but he kept his expression neutral. Unmarried and with child, it explained much about her situation in a society unforgiving of such circumstances. The father, he prompted gently. A traveling salesman passing through my town in Missouri, she said, her voice hardening. He made promises. Said he'd return for me before the baby came. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. My father didn't. He cast you out, Wyatt asked, though he already knew the answer. Penelope nodded. My father is the pastor of our church, said I brought shame upon the family. He gave me money for a train ticket to Denver, where I have an aunt, but the money was stolen in Kansas City, and I've been making my way west however I could since then. How did you end up here? I was riding in a wagon with a family heading to Oregon, the husband. She touched the bruise on her cheek. He wanted things I wasn't willing to give. I fled during the night 3 days ago, been walking ever since, sleeping where I could. Wyatt felt a surge of anger toward the men who had wronged her but kept his voice steady. You're safe now. You can stay here until you're well enough to travel, or until the baby comes if that's sooner. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition, Wyatt interrupted. I've got the space and it appears you need it. Why would you help a stranger, a fallen woman? Penelope asked, her eyes searching his. Wyatt considered her question carefully. I've seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes, Miss Jackson. During the war, after it too. I reckon if I can ease someone else's burden, I should. As for being fallen, that's between you and the Almighty, not for me to judge. The genuine kindness in his voice broke something in Penelope. She began to sob, years of shame and fear pouring out of her. Wyatt sat awkwardly, unsure how to comfort her, finally settling on offering his handkerchief. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her tears. I haven't had anyone be kind to me in so long. Get some rest, Wyatt said, standing. You can take the bed, I'll sleep out here by the fire. Penelope began to protest, but exhaustion overcame her. Within minutes of lying down, she was fast asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since Wyatt had found her. As he made a pallet for himself near the hearth, Wyatt found himself watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. He'd lived alone for years, content with his horses and occasional trips into town. Now he had a pregnant, unmarried woman under his roof, the subject of scandal in these parts, but as he drifted off to sleep, he knew he couldn't have done differently. Some things a man just knew were right, regardless of what others might think. The next morning, Wyatt woke at dawn as usual, surprised to find Penelope already up and attempting to cook breakfast with his meager supplies. You should be resting, he said, quickly taking over the task. I've imposed enough, she replied. I want to earn my keep. There'll be time for that when you're stronger, Wyatt insisted. For now, just focus on taking care of yourself and the little one. Over the following days, they settled into an unexpected routine. Wyatt tended to his ranch work, mending fences, caring for the livestock, and preparing for the coming summer. Penelope, despite his protests, gradually took over the household tasks as her strength returned. She proved to be an excellent cook, transforming his basic provisions into surprisingly tasty meals. They talked during these meals, sharing stories of their lives. Wyatt told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about his time in the war and his journey west. Penelope spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her love of books, and her dreams of becoming a teacher before her life took its unexpected turn. What Wyatt didn't tell her was how her presence had transformed his lonely existence. How he found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each evening, to her smile and the sound of her voice. How he caught himself watching her as she hummed while working around the cabin, her hands cradling her growing belly. It was dangerous territory for a man who'd sworn off attachments after losing so many friends in the war. Even more dangerous considering her condition, and the child that would soon arrive, a child that wasn't his. One evening, about 2 weeks after Penelope's arrival, they sat on Wyatt's small porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "It's beautiful here," Penelope said softly, "so open and free." "That's why I chose it," Wyatt replied. "No neighbors for miles. Just me and the land. And now me, intruding on your solitude," she added with a small smile. Wyatt looked at her, noticing how the setting sun cast a golden glow on her face. "You're not an intrusion, Penelope." The use of her first name hung between them, intimate in a way their previous conversations hadn't been. "I'll need to leave soon," she said, breaking the moment. "My aunt in Denver, do you even know her address?" Wyatt interrupted. Penelope hesitated. "No, I just know she's there. Or at least, she was 5 years ago when she last wrote to my father." "So you'd arrive in a city you've never visited, with no money, no contacts, and a newborn baby, hoping to find an aunt who might not even live there anymore." Wyatt couldn't keep the frustration from his voice. "What choice do I have?" Penelope's eyes flashed. "I can't stay here forever." "Why not?" The words escaped before Wyatt could stop them. Penelope stared at him, clearly surprised. "What are you saying?" Wyatt hadn't planned this, hadn't even admitted to himself what he was feeling. But now, faced with the prospect of her leaving, the words tumbled out. "Stay here, have the baby here, I have room, and I can provide for you both." "As what, Wyatt? Your housekeeper?" There was a challenge in her voice. "As whatever you want to be," he answered honestly. "I'm not proposing anything improper. I'm just saying you have options beyond throwing yourself on the mercy of a relative who might not even remember you." Penelope was quiet for a long moment. "And the baby, what would people think?" "I don't much care what people think," Wyatt said. "But if you're asking what I would tell them, I'd say the child is mine." The shocked expression on her face made him continue quickly. "Not to claim any rights over your child, but to protect you both from gossip. In time, when you're settled and ready, you can make your own way if that's what you want." "Why would you do that?" Penelope whispered. "Take responsibility for another man's child." Wyatt looked out over his land, gathering his thoughts. "When I was fighting in the war, I made a promise to God. I promised that if I survived, I'd try to leave this world better than I found it. Helping you and your child, that seems like keeping that promise." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Wyatt replied. "That's all I'm asking for now." That night, Wyatt lay awake longer than usual, questioning his own motives. Was he truly acting out of kindness, or was there something more selfish at work? He'd grown fond of Penelope more than fond, if he was honest with himself. But she was vulnerable, dependent on him, and carrying another man's child. The last thing he wanted was to take advantage of her situation. His thoughts were interrupted by a cry from the bed. He sat up quickly to find Penelope clutching her stomach, her face contorted in pain. "What is it?" he asked, rushing to her side. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong, it's too early." Panic seized Wyatt. The nearest doctor was in Cheyenne, at least 3 hours' ride away. "I'll go for the doctor." "No." Penelope grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "There's no time. The baby is coming now." Wyatt had delivered foals and calves, but never a human baby. The thought terrified him, but Penelope's next contraction left no doubt that the child was indeed coming, ready or not. "All right," he said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "I'll help you through this." The next several hours were a blur of activity. Wyatt boiled water, gathered clean cloths, and did his best to comfort Penelope through increasingly painful contractions. She was brave, biting back screams that would have brought lesser men to their knees. "Tell me about your home in Missouri," Wyatt said, trying to distract her between contractions. "What was it like growing up there?" Between gasps of pain, Penelope described a childhood filled with church picnics, swimming in the creek during hot summers, and reading by candlelight after her chores were done. Wyatt held her hand, wiped her brow, and listened, amazed at her strength. As dawn approached, Penelope's labor intensified. "I need to push," she announced, her voice determined despite her exhaustion. Wyatt positioned himself at the end of the bed, remembering what little he knew about birthing. "Then push when you're ready." With a cry that seemed to come from her very soul, Penelope bore down. Wyatt caught glimpses of the baby's head, then shoulders, and finally, with one last heroic effort from Penelope, the child slipped into his waiting hands, a girl. Small but perfect, with a shock of dark hair like her mother's. For a terrifying moment, the baby didn't move or cry. Wyatt gently cleared her mouth and nose, then rubbed her back the way he'd seen a midwife do once in a field hospital during the war. Suddenly, the tiny girl drew in a breath and let out a wail that filled the cabin. "She's beautiful," Wyatt whispered, wrapping the baby in a clean shirt before placing her in Penelope's eager arms. Just like her mother. Tears streamed down Penelope's face as she gazed at her daughter. "Hello, little one, I've been waiting so long to meet you." Wyatt busied himself with the remaining tasks, cutting the cord with a sterilized knife, delivering the afterbirth, and cleaning up as best he could. All the while, his eyes kept returning to the tableau on his bed, Penelope cradling her newborn daughter, a look of wonder on her exhausted face. In that moment, something shifted inside Wyatt. A fierce protectiveness washed over him, not just for Penelope, but for this tiny new life that had entered the world in his humble cabin. "I meant what I said yesterday," he said quietly, sitting beside them on the edge of the bed. "You both have a place here for as long as you want it." Penelope looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I'm naming her Hope," she said, "because that's what you've given us." The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment as they adapted to life with a newborn. Wyatt rode into Cheyenne for supplies, returning with not only necessities, but also a wooden cradle he'd purchased from the town's carpenter. He spent late nights walking the floor with little Hope when she was fussy, allowing Penelope to get much-needed rest. To his surprise, Wyatt found he had a natural affinity for caring for the infant. His large, rough hands became gentle when holding her, and he discovered that his deep voice singing old army songs could soothe her to sleep like nothing else. One afternoon, as June began to warm the Wyoming plains, Wyatt returned from checking his cattle to find Penelope sitting on the porch, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I've been thinking about your offer," Penelope said without preamble, "about staying here." Wyatt's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "And I'll stay at least for now," she said, "but I need to know something first." "Anything," Wyatt replied, sitting beside her. "If I stay, what would we be to each other?" Her directness surprised him. "I won't live in a state of uncertainty, Wyatt, not again." Wyatt removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he gathered his thoughts. "I care for you, Penelope, more than I expected to, more than might be proper given how short a time we've known each other." "And Hope," she pressed. "I already love her," Wyatt admitted, the truth of it surprising even him. "I know she's not mine by blood, but that doesn't seem to matter to my heart." Penelope studied his face. "Are you saying you want to be a family?" "I'm saying I want the chance for us to become one," Wyatt clarified. "Not rushed, not forced by circumstance, but given time to grow naturally. I'm asking for a chance to court you properly, to see if what I'm feeling might be returned." "And if it isn't?" Penelope asked, though the softness in her eyes suggested she already knew her own heart. "Then you'll still have a home here for as long as you need it, and Hope will always have my protection and care." Wyatt meant every word. "I made a promise the night I found you in my stable, though I didn't say it aloud. I promised I'd look after you both, whatever came." Penelope reached out, taking his calloused hand in hers. "I think I'd like to be courted by you, Wyatt Hawkins." Hope stirred in her mother's arms, her tiny face scrunching before settling back into sleep. Both adults looked down at her, their expressions tender. "There will be talk," Wyatt warned, "when we go into town, questions about Hope." "Let them talk," Penelope said with newfound confidence. "I've lived through worse than gossip." As summer bloomed across the Wyoming territory, Wyatt and Penelope's relationship deepened. True to his word, Wyatt courted her properly, bringing wildflowers he found while working the land, reading to her in the evenings from one of the few books he owned, and even arranging for the traveling preacher who stopped by the ranch to stay for dinner so Penelope could engage in the theological discussions she had missed from her father's household. Their first trip into Cheyenne together caused exactly the stir Wyatt had predicted. He introduced Penelope as a widow whose husband had died before their child was born, and whom he had met through correspondence after advertising for a housekeeper. It was a story thin enough that most saw through it, but few challenged it directly to their faces. The exception was Abigail Stanton, the outspoken wife of the general store owner who cornered Penelope while Wyatt was purchasing supplies. "We all know that's not his baby, Mrs. Stanton said, nodding toward Hope sleeping in Penelope's arms. "Wyatt Hawkins has lived alone since he came to these parts 8 years ago, never so much as looked at a woman in town, then suddenly he's got a widow with a newborn. I wasn't born yesterday, girl." Penelope stood her ground. "What exactly are you implying, Mrs. Stanton?" "I'm implying that decent folk don't take kindly to arrangements like yours," the older woman sniffed. "Then it's fortunate that I concern myself with God's judgment rather than yours," Penelope replied calmly. "And God has blessed me with a child and a man kind enough to offer us protection when we needed it most. If you find that indecent, perhaps the fault lies in your understanding of decency." Word of the exchange spread quickly through the small community. To Penelope's surprise, many of the women of Cheyenne began to warm to her after that, impressed by her courage in standing up to the town's self-appointed moral guardian. By August, the relationship between Wyatt and Penelope had progressed from cautious friendship to something deeper. They had not yet spoken of marriage, but the possibility hung in the air between them, especially in quiet moments after Hope was asleep. One such evening, they sat side by side on the porch swing Wyatt had built, watching a spectacular sunset. "I received a letter today," Penelope said, breaking their comfortable silence. "From my father." Wyatt turned to her, surprised. "How did he find you?" "I wrote to him last month, told him about Hope, about you, about our life here." Penelope twisted her hands in her lap. "I wanted him to know his granddaughter exists, even if he never acknowledges her." "What did he say?" Wyatt asked gently. "He says he's prayed about it, and God has led him to forgive me," she said with a bitter laugh. "He's invited me to return home, just me, not Hope. He says they could find a good Christian family to adopt her, and then I could start fresh without the reminder of my sin." Anger flashed across Wyatt's face. "That's not forgiveness, that's control." "I know." Penelope leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I already wrote back declining his generous offer." "Good." Wyatt wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Hope isn't something to be ashamed of or hidden away. She's perfect." Penelope looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "So are you, Wyatt Hawkins." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Slowly, Wyatt lowered his head, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Penelope closed the distance, pressing her lips to his in their first kiss. It was gentle and brief, but it sent Wyatt's heart racing. When they parted, he kept his arm around her, and they sat in contented silence watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "I love you," Wyatt said finally, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "I think I have since the night Hope was born, when I saw how brave you were, how strong." "I love you too," Penelope replied without hesitation. "You've shown me what a good man truly is, not through words or promises, but through actions, through care and respect." Wyatt took her hand in his. "I want to ask you something, but I don't want you to feel obligated because of your situation." "Ask me," Penelope encouraged. "Will you marry me, Penelope? Not because you need a home or protection, but because we've found something worth building a life around." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, because I love you, and because I want Hope to have a father who will teach her what a man should be." Their wedding took place in late September, a simple ceremony performed by the traveling preacher in front of their cabin. A few neighbors from distant ranches attended, along with some of the townspeople who had grown to accept and even like the unconventional couple. Wyatt stood tall and proud in his best clothes, watching as Penelope walked toward him in a blue dress she had sewn herself, carrying Hope, who wore a matching bonnet. In that moment, looking at the two people who had transformed his solitary existence into a life filled with purpose and joy, Wyatt knew with absolute certainty that finding Penelope curled in his stable that stormy April night had been the greatest blessing of his life. After the ceremony and a modest celebration, the guests departed, leaving the new family alone. As night fell, Wyatt rocked Hope to sleep, singing the gentle lullabies that had become their special ritual. "She's truly yours now," Penelope said softly, watching from the doorway of what had become the nursery, a small addition Wyatt had built onto the cabin over the summer. "She always was," Wyatt replied, carefully laying the sleeping infant in her cradle. "From the moment she took her first breath in my hands." That night, as husband and wife, they spoke of their future, of expanding the ranch, of possibly having more children, of creating the family neither of them had fully experienced in their own childhoods. "I never thought I'd find this," Penelope admitted as they lay together in the darkness. "After everything that happened, I thought I'd lost my chance at happiness." Wyatt pulled her closer. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. If you hadn't been desperate that night, you'd never have hidden in my stable. If I hadn't lost my mare, I might not have found you. Do you ever regret it, taking us in?" Penelope asked. "Not for a single moment," Wyatt assured her. "You and Hope gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a family to love." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Penelope proving to have a keen mind for business that complemented Wyatt's practical skills. Hope grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother's dark hair and a smile that could melt Wyatt's heart with a glance. 2 years after their wedding, Penelope gave birth to a son they named William, after Wyatt's father. 2 years after that came another daughter, Sarah. To all 3 children, Wyatt was simply Pa, a constant source of love, guidance, and protection. If the older residents of Cheyenne ever remembered that Hope wasn't Wyatt's biological child, they kept it to themselves. As far as anyone who mattered was concerned, Hope Hawkins was every bit as much Wyatt's daughter as her younger siblings were his children. On Hope's 7th birthday, after the celebrations were over and the younger children were asleep, Penelope found Wyatt standing on the porch, gazing up at the stars. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said, slipping her arm around his waist. "I was just thinking about the night I found you," Wyatt replied, pulling her close. "How close I came to missing you entirely. If I'd checked the horses earlier or later, if you'd hidden somewhere else. But you didn't miss me," Penelope reminded him. "You found me exactly when I needed to be found." Wyatt nodded, looking back toward the house where their children slept peacefully. "I made a promise that night, you know, when I realized you were going to have a baby. I promised myself that I would raise that child as my own, no matter what happened." "You've more than kept that promise," Penelope said softly. "Hope adores you, and I her," Wyatt agreed. "Sometimes I forget she didn't come from me. Then she'll say something or give me a look that's so much like you, and I remember what a miracle it is that she's ours at all." Penelope stood on tiptoe to kiss him, still feeling the same thrill she had the first time. "Do you know what Hope told me today? She said when she grows up, she wants to marry someone just like her pa." Pride and emotion welled in Wyatt's chest. "Then she'll have to find a very lucky man indeed, because he'll be getting a woman raised by the strongest, most loving mother a girl could have." As they stood together under the vast Wyoming sky, Wyatt reflected on the unlikely path that had led him here from solitary rancher to husband and father of 3. All because he'd followed his instincts on a stormy night and opened his home and heart to a woman in need. "I love you, Penelope Hawkins," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you, Wyatt Hawkins," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left." Together they walked back into the home they had built, not just of wood and nails, but of compassion, courage, and unwavering love, a testament to the family that began the night. A cowboy found a pregnant woman curled in his stable and swore he'd raise her baby as his own.